Okay, one of the number one diagnoses, or one of the number, I guess, big culprits of our diagnoses that we see in the clinic is pelvic floor tension. Pelvic floor tension happens more often than not, more often than you would think, like, gosh, everything must just be really loosey-goosey down here because I had a baby, right? Or because I'm peeing my pants, or because I have prolapse. Things down in the pelvic floor must just be weak. Contrary to that belief, what we tend to see in the clinic is more often these muscles are actually high and tight, right? 26 different muscles down in the pelvis. Lots of room for compensation and error. You will hear me say that all the time. And that's exactly what we see in the clinic. When these muscles are not behaving how they're supposed to, again, we want them moving through a full range of motion and relaxing all the way back out. When they're doing that, they're functioning how they're supposed to and doing their job. When they're not, we can start to develop tailbone pain, let's say. Tailbone pain can happen because the muscles front to back can start to gain a little bit tension back here, or maybe the ones off to the side. The ones that are pulling on that tailbone can start to tighten up and pull that tailbone in. And that can be uncomfortable when we move from sit to stand, when we sit down, or when we have a bowel movement. Then pulling nice and tight can also create some lower back pain, lower back issues. If they're not functioning well and are more tight, that can also cause bladder leakage. It can cause fecal smearing. It can cause farts to just kind of come out when we least expect it. And it can even cause pelvic organ prolapse. That was one that, for me, postpartum, I developed bladder prolapse, and I thought, I know I'm high and tight down there. I'm a more high-tone individual. But it made me think, gosh, my pelvic floor must just be really weak. A lot of times when patients are coming in with prolapse symptoms, we notice part of the pelvic floor is probably really, really tight and overworking because the muscles want to protect the organs, so they're trying to hold things in. And again, we want them working well. So the last thing that we would see would be pain with intercourse, pain with pleasure, pain with orgasm. And that's going to happen, again, if a muscle is tight, it's going to be uncomfortable when you touch it. Think about if you ever go get a shot. You want to relax all the way, kind of melt before you get the shot, compared to if you were tightening up all your muscles there. It's going to be very tender when you get that something poking those muscles. The same thing comes down to the pelvic floor. We've got to figure out what muscles are holding tension and learn to let them go. Now, in the clinic, patients come in. I'm typically doing an internal exam with one hand, and I'm feeling the muscles. When I feel them, things might be uncomfortable. We might find muscles that aren't moving well. They might feel more tight, and then my patient is telling me if it's painful. Now, we're not doing that with you at home unless you want to gently kind of palpate the tissue or touch the tissue. You can do that. I just want you to keep in mind, try not to go just for the Kegels, because that's not always the answer. More often than not, it is more work on mobility. Stretch the tissue out, contract it up, put it all the way back down. I call those check-ins, pelvic check-ins. And I have my patients set an alarm once an hour, or they can just kind of look at their computer and know every time, every hour, or every time I get an email or a text message, I'm just going to pick up my pelvic floor, pick up that blueberry, suck up that smoothie, and then I'm going to put it all the way back down. Now, did it feel more tight when I originally started out and then it felt looser afterwards? That would probably be a good indication that you were clenching and we needed to let it go. Just like people end up clenching their abdominal muscles and they're tightening their abs all the time, they need to let it go. If they find that they're tightening their butt all the time, you need to let it go. If you can tell that you're tightening your pelvic floor, you need to let it go. And patients will ask, well, how do I do that, Amanda? You try to tell it more often to let go. So that's where that alarm comes in. Work on picking it up, putting it all the way back down. Another question I get asked is, well, why is my pelvic floor so tight? There are different reasons for that. One of the main reasons that we see in our clinic can be a stress reason. When we're stressed, some of us can hold tension in our pelvic floor muscles. This really tells emotion here. So it may be, number one, that we are not getting a lot of sleep. We're stressed with the new family life, if we've just had a baby, if jobs are stressful, home life is stressful, life in general. We can hold tension down here. And then we've got to work on letting it go. That's where the diaphragmatic breath comes in so beautifully, because it helps to lengthen it out and bring it back. It helps to work on that mobility. If we are holding tension down here, especially after having a baby, our pelvic floor is always holding us up because we have the lack of the core support here as well. So it's really looking at what our posture movements are throughout that day to let it go. If you had a traumatic birth experience, we can tend to hold trauma down in these muscles. So really kind of going back through your mind process of the childbirthing experience. And as you're doing that, if you get to a negative part in your story where you're like, oh, that nurse was so mean, or I didn't get the clear drape that I wanted with my C-section, whatever it was, and you can feel your muscles tense up with that, I want you to rewind that story that is in your brain. Go back to that moment, like everything's beautiful, everything's behaving well. Find the positive there. Was there another nurse that was really nice to you? Was your partner there, or a doula that was being very supportive? Find the positive there, because the more that we can focus on the positive, the more these pelvic floor muscles won't hold as much tension, and they'll start to let go, and we could really work on our healing journey. That is such a huge piece that we see here in the clinic with our postpartum moms, is a lot of us are holding that emotional, not only physical stress, but the emotional stress in here as well. So start to work through that. Start to retell yourself the birth story. You can go see a counselor to help you through that, but you can also start to just replay that over in your mind too, and think about, can you feel the pelvic floor tense up as you're telling the story? And if you can, pause the story, rewind, maybe pick up that pelvic floor, put it all the way back down, or do a couple of your diaphragmatic breaths to help lengthen the pelvic floor out, and then try again. So if you have any questions on that, please let me know. This is something that I had struggled with for the last decade of my life, and I'm sure before then, but definitely the last decade. My pelvic floor tension caused me to have bladder urgency and frequency, abdominal cramping, bloatage, pain with intercourse, leakage, and that was all pre-kiddos. And then it all came back after childbirth, and then I added in my prolapse too. So I've definitely gone through this myself. If you have any questions on it, I'm more than happy to help or share my story if that can be of any help with it, any guidance to getting you to being pain-free or symptom-free. I want to help. So please let me know.